Okay, so on this week's episode of OBF Unplugged, I have Edan Ravin. So Edan is just a phenomenal speaker and has such an inspirational story. So I read the book, The Hoops Whisperer, going back a number of years ago. And what I quickly came to realize was it's not necessarily a book about basketball, even though basketball underpins many of the stories. It's very much a book of lessons around courage and integrity and bravery and life and really going after your dream. And, you know, I'm so excited, really, really so excited to have Edan on today. And welcome to the show, Edan.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me.
Always a pleasure to speak with people who are on my wavelength when it comes to coaching. And I think that first of all, what I really want to get into, just to set the ball rolling here, is like, how did a lawyer, and even you would express yourself, a reasonably good basketball player, end up coaching the likes of LeBron and Chris Paul and Kevin Durant and Steph Curry and Kobe? Like, could you please share your story into how you got?
Sure. So it's always funny, right? When I meet people and they say, well, what do you do? And I do lots of different things, right? So I'll say, yeah, I train professional athletes. And they say, like, what? I say, I probably work with over 100 professional basketball players and 15 NBA All-Stars. And they look at me like, man, you're full of shit, And look, I don't blame them for people being skeptical. I'm about 6 feet tall. I weigh about 180 pounds. When standing next to the NBA players like I work with, people think I'm either a super fan, their lawyer, their accountant, their public relations person, their insurance broker. Sometimes people even think I'm maybe I'm their stylist or their security guard, I guess, because I have a bald head, but never, ever, ever like a trainer, right? And I never played basketball in the NBA, and I never played Division I college basketball. I never played Division II college basketball. I never played Division III college basketball. I didn't play basketball professionally overseas either. The last time I played organized basketball was, you ready for this one? Back in high school, when I was the best player at a religious Jewish school. And I'm talking, we wore yarmulkes on our head and we played against other teams that wore yarmulkes on their head, right? And my only dream back then was to see Duke University coach Mike Krzyzewski and North Carolina coach Dean Smith patrolling the sidelines, both wearing yarmulkes, arguing over whose scholarship I was going to take. But obviously, that never happened. And even though my family is Jewish, I promise you, we don't know the other famous Jewish families in professional basketball. NBA commissioners Adam Silver and David Stern never came to my house for Friday night Sabbath dinners. And I'm not the uncle, son, nephew, cousin, brother, homeboy, girlfriend, boyfriend, teammate of anyone in professional sports, which is how normally people get a job in that space. My academic and professional background was, when I first started doing this, was in law, right? Surprisingly, it was a job that I absolutely hated to do, but it was something that I felt like I was kind of supposed to do. And despite not having all these sort of connections or relationships or background that everyone thinks is so necessary to break in and have a success in professional sports, I was able to carve a niche for myself, training many of the best athletes in the world, because one, I had a lot of faith in myself. Two, I'm a self-reliant person. And three, I trust my own instincts. So people will say, well, how did this all happen? And I'd say, well, it's kind of a long story. The 5-second answer is that I found something I love to do, and I was stubborn enough to believe I could do it. And there's a 15-minute answer that requires people to be a little patient with me. So I grew up in a very religious home. My mom is from Israel. My dad is from Russia. And they both devoted their entire life to teaching some form of Jewish education, whether that's Holocaust studies, comparative religion, the Old Testament, rabbinical commentary, Hebrew literature, Jewish studies, something like that, right? And I grew up in these very religious homes, and you kind of grow up sort of the way I did. There's not a lot of career options. You can become a rabbi, a cantor, a doctor, a lawyer, an engineer, a teacher, an accountant. It's like 8 things that you must pick when you grow up like I did. So I did what any good Jewish boy was supposed to do, and I picked the lawyer box. But I was a very talented athlete because I taught myself the game and I taught myself how to play. But I wasn't permitted to pursue basketball in any sort of capacity, because growing up the way I did, you had to pick a job, one of those 8 categories. So I ended up burying basketball in my backyard like it was my pet goldfish, and I ended up becoming a lawyer. But man, when I tell you I was a miserable lawyer, I was a miserable lawyer. I would sit behind my big lawyer desk in my big lawyer suit, staring at my pile of big lawyer work. And I would just be like, oh God, you got to save me. But when you grow up religious like I do, you kind of tend to see everything in a form of prayer. So I remember I would clasp my hands and I would just pray that God would send down a lightning bolt that would impale itself on my desk, that would have a blueprint for my future. And I could look at this yellow sticky note and say, Don, you're going to go from A to B to C to D to E and to F. And I would pray every single morning that I would see this lightning bolt and this blueprint, but it never happened. And I'm a pretty patient person. I'm a pretty faithful person. I just kept on praying and praying and praying. And there was nothing, not a peep from God, right? So I remember I used to self-medicate from all the anxiety and frustration I felt before work. And I would go to this local YMCA and I would run until I couldn't run anymore. And I would swim until I was exhausted. And to get all the nervous energy out of me. So one day as I was leaving the gym, I saw an ad on a corkboard for a 12 and under boys basketball team. And I wrote down the number and I came back to the office and I volunteered to coach this team. But I couldn't just, it wasn't as easy as you could just say, oh, you call up and you volunteer. I had to convince the managing partner in the office that this was a form of business development, because the lawyers in my office would always kind of cut my billable hours. They said I was very inefficient. So something that took me 40 hours, they'd say, oh, that should have only taken you 10. So I had to convince this managing partner in the firm that if I stenciled the name of the firm on the back of these 12-year-old boys' jerseys, this could draw attention to the firm. This would be business development, and this would be very smart for the firm. So he's like, oh, that's a great idea. And I was like, great. So I paid for these jerseys, and then I started volunteering with these kids. I had no idea what I was doing. I never coached anyone. I never trained anybody. I just gave these little kids drills I had created for myself when I was a kid. Some running drills, some shooting drills, some agility drills. And after a couple of days of practice, you know, a mom called me and said, she said, Don, can I talk to you? I said, sure. She's like, I don't know what you're doing with my kid. I was like, lady, what are you talking about? She's like, I've never seen my kid so focused, so engaged, so serious in my entire life. My kid is a spaz. My kid gets detention. My kid gets in trouble. What are you doing? And I was like, look, lady, maybe I just know more than the father who's coaching his son, one of the other teams, right? Like, it's 12-year-old kids, right? So then at the end of the season, I got a call from another parent and she asked me to come to practice early that day. So I get to practice early and I see a setup of pizza boxes and red cups. And, lo and behold, all the kids had pulled their allowance money to throw me a pizza party. And I thought, shit, that's weird, right? I shouldn't be eating pizza in the first place. And I barely know these kids. And so a mother pulled me aside and she said, I don't know what you're doing with my kids, but you've really just changed them. And I was like, lady, I don't know what you're talking about. Maybe I'm just a pretty good teacher because I inherited a teaching gene from my parents. So we go undefeated. I continue to volunteer for another, few months. And then one day I come into work and I see my phone is buzzing from one of the managing partners' office. I'm like, shit, I got to go see him now. So this guy always had me on edge, right? I could walk by, I go past him in the hallway and he'd say, what time is it? And I'm thinking, you mean in Dublin, Australia, or in New York? Like, I second guess everything around this guy because he always had me on edge. So he called me into his office and he's holding a memo that I had just written and he's waving up in his hand like it was like a flag. And he asked me a question about the memo and I answered it. And he proceeded to ask me the same question 10 times, each time projecting his voice another decibel higher. So by the 11th time, I finally spoke up. Now, mind you, I was like the quiet guy in the office. They could yell at me and scream at me and insult me. And I would just be like, yeah, I would just take it like the good dog, right? And so then one day after he started yelling at me, I just looked at him and said, why are you busting my balls? If you want me to change it, I will. If you don't want me to change it, I won't. At that moment, he picked up his receiver and he started dialing. And I knew he was dialing the head of human resources to complain that I was being insubordinate. I was like, I'm done. Went into my office. I typed up my letter of resignation and I quit on the spot. It was as if 10,000 pounds of the worst smelling dog shit was like removed from my favorite pair of Jordans, right? Like my favorite Jordan 1s, the red, white, and black OGs, and like, I was like, okay, I'm free. So that feeling lasted for about a day. Now I move home and I don't know what to do with my life. I'm sending resumes, I'm interviewing, I'm this, I'm that. I'm trying to do anything other than law, but nothing's happening, right? So I'm living under my mom's roof and she keeps on bugging me. You got to go back to law. That's what you know. You get a 401k, you get a check every 2 weeks, you get health insurance. Like, this is what you spent all this time and money and effort. You got to go back to law. And I was like, I don't want to go back. It's torture. She's like, you got to give it a try. Maybe the first time wasn't good, but maybe the second time could be great. So I did what every good Jewish boy was supposed to do. And I listened to my mom, and I went back and I got a job at another big international law firm. And it was like I'd gone from the ghetto to the White House. It was a very lovely place. The people were very kind and respectful. I got to see the world. They paid me pretty decent. But if I took up all the lipstick off of it, it was still the practice of law, and I hated every single second of it. So I still continued to self-medicate for my anxiety of going to work. And at nights or in the mornings, I would just go to the park and shoot on my own. And I would do some drills, and I would run some sprints, and I would just shoot baskets. But one evening, I ran into a couple kids that I used to play basketball with in the park. And years later, they were bigger, taller, faster, stronger. And one was playing, I think, one in Germany professionally, one was playing in Italy professionally. And I said to them, and never in a million universes did I ever think that this proposition I gave them would end up where I am today. And I said, hey, you guys want to meet me in the gym to work on a few things? And they were like, yeah. So I met them in the gym, and I literally gave them drills that I had created for when I was a kid. Some shooting drills, some dribbling drills, some running drills, just whatever I had concocted for myself when I taught myself how to play and how to become a better athlete. They loved it. They said, Edan, can we come back tomorrow? I was like, you want to come back tomorrow? Yeah, sure. So for the next 3.5 years, I literally met them any minute I had free time, at 5 in the morning, at 9 at night, on the weekends. Like anytime I had free time and someone would call me, I would literally meet them in the gym. And they told a friend who told a friend who told a friend. And it was like, oh my God, I found so much joy in this. So maybe 3 years later, I'm still working at this big law firm, 60 hours a week, and volunteering maybe 40, 50 hours a week, this other stuff, right? Just because it gave me happiness. I'm having lunch with my mom, and she asks me in a very thick Hebrew accent if I charge the players that I work with. And I was like, what are you talking about? There was my entire life I've been making money doing what I hated. I couldn't imagine all of a sudden now doing, like, getting paid for something I would otherwise do for free. And I just, I didn't know how to answer that. I was terrified that if I brought up money into this conversation, that the one thing I discovered I loved would end up disappearing along with them. And so then my mom says to me, she's like, you're only worth what these people are willing to pay for you. And look, my mom and dad, they can quote Deuteronomy, they can quote Genesis, they can quote Proverbs, they can quote, all the books of the Testaments, but they don't give you financial advice, right? But at that point that my mom made was actually very true. So for the next 5 or 6 months, my mom's point just kind of rattled in my head like a hurricane. But I didn't have the courage to talk about money with anybody. So one day I get a phone call from an NBA player, a very well-known player, who had just gotten cleared to get back on the court after an Achilles tendon tear. And he asked me if I'd work with him for a few days. And I said, sure. And at the end of the conversation, I said to him as fast as I absolutely could, I said, pay me whatever you think this is worth to you. He could have paid me with some carrot cake, 6 dozen chocolate chip cookies, a grilled cheese sandwich. I would have been completely okay. As long as I could have turned around and shown my mom something, she would have left me alone. So I don't even know if he heard me. I was kind of hoping that he didn't hear me. I just wanted to do the work and not say anything. So we were done after that week, and we were sitting down having lunch. And he ended up taking in a white envelope, and he passed it across the table. And I opened the envelope, and I couldn't believe my eyes. It was a check with more zeros than I had ever seen in my entire life. And I felt so unbelievably uncomfortable that I took the check and I pushed it back across the table. And it was almost as if we were in high school again, like, those little paper football games you play where you toss the paper back and forth. It was as if we did that for 10 minutes. I just felt completely uncomfortable taking anything from this guy. I said, look, man, I don't have an education in this. I do this for free. I do this because I enjoy this. He's like, no. This is what you represent to me, and I want to thank you for it. So that moment was a very poignant moment in my life because it marked this very circuitous sort of internship I had in myself. I had finally developed a methodology. I'd finally developed an expertise. I finally developed something that I could quantify. And shortly thereafter, I quit the practice of law. And so for more than the last decade, when people ask me about my life, I tell them I live the most unimaginable life. I have trained everyone you can absolutely imagine, from the world's best basketball players to some of the most famous celebrities to diplomats. Last summer I spent some time doing some stuff with Bayern Munich, the soccer team. Like, I've traveled the world, and I've written books, and I've got to speak and meet so many unbelievable people doing something that literally I would have done for free. And so, when people in the professional sports space, or people who are kind of trying to kind of figure their way out, I always say to them, like, you got to put aside like the Instagram, you got to put aside the YouTube, you got to put aside this focus on a drill or being derivative. You just got to figure out what makes sense to you, not copy, and figure out what your own special sauce is, right? Because for me, I've never done any of that, right? I don't think it's necessary. I think it's just more about having faith and intuition in your own self, right? And trying to figure out, create your own methodology, create your own gospel, right? Like, obviously, you need a certain baseline of education and expertise and experience, but ultimately, you've got to learn how to make your own sauce, right? And that, to me, is where I found that I've had success, because I wasn't privy to the golden doors that the institutional sports represents. They didn't allow me in. I don't regurgitate their doctrine because I was never permitted in those doors, because I don't look like them. I don't wear the jerseys like they did. I'm an outsider, you know? And yes, I have worked with everyone you can imagine, and I'm still considered an outsider. So because of that, I had to learn how to bake my own bread and make my own sauce, and find my own cheese, and learn how to do everything. And along the way, it was very much a blessing, because I don't copy shit. I make my own, I do my own, and I have my own philosophy.
Yeah, that's such a powerful, inspirational story that is actually, it's mind blowing to think that you can go from a process of training an underage team to giving your time to athletes to improve themselves, just to getting a call from a professional player to go and work with
Sure,
him. It's
sure. And then
phenomenal.
what it represents as well is that, like, I didn't go from law to training Carmelo Anthony. I spent
Yeah.
12 years with Carmelo Anthony. It took like a lifetime to get there. But it's like, I always tell people, if it really matters to you, you'll make it happen,
Mm.
right? Like, and there is no return on the investment. There's no return on the time. You don't know when it'll happen. It could be tomorrow. It could be 6 months. It could be 6 years. It could be 60 years. But one thing I can definitely assure you, that it eventually will happen.
Yeah.
But everyone wants a timeline on everyone's like a sort of a finish line on their efforts. You know, if I study 6 days, well, 6 days from now, good things will happen. Well, it doesn't work like that, right? And the thing is that if you truly love it, you love the struggle, you love the work, you love the process, you love the study, you love everything about it. You don't just love the finish line and the accolade and being able to say, I was in the gym with Cristiano Ronaldo, because then you're just a fucking groupie, right? If you truly love the work, you love every bit of the work. And the reality is, I love every bit of the work. I hate the business of it. I love the work, and I've done this a long time. And I still get butterflies every time I go into a gym, and I still get excited about it. And I still get excited to see, like, how the athlete responds. I will never not love that. Do I like the business of what it's become? No, I don't. Right. But the actual fundamental work, always.
And do you struggle with self-promotion? Is that a thing that you grapple with in your own mind?
It's not my nature. I go very religious. I'm not a boastful person. I'm a modest person. I'm a pretty soft-spoken person, except when, if I have to do something like this, or athletes, or, big audiences, I'm a very reserved person. And I understand it's the new reality, but it's not in me to say, to be in a gym with famous people and take photos,
Mm.
right? Or to post the work product. I think there's something about, I always said, it's not about me, it's about them, right? Like, they trust me with something that comes second in the life, behind God, family, and their health, and that's their game.
Yeah.
So I try to be very mindful of it, and be very, like, treat it with a lot of, like, reverence,
Mm.
right? And I don't allow, maybe I'm naive, maybe I'm short-sighted. It's the way the world is right now, but it's something I'm a bit of a reluctant adopter. And I think that there's a lot of ways to kind of be influential and be meaningful without posting a picture of my food or my abs, right? Or being on a private plane with a famous person, right? I think that I'd rather sort of be known for an opinion. I'd rather be known for a methodology. I'd rather be known for someone who bucks the system. I'd rather be known for someone, who writes good children's books, right? I'd rather be known for other things than someone that's just, I don't know, trying to warm their hands on the talent of somebody else.
Yeah. And can we just go back to that initial story? And you spoke there about trusting your instinct, okay?
Yes.
And that first professional player who contacted you, I think it was
Yeah.
Elton Brand, actually, wasn't
Yes.
it? Yeah. And
Yes.
could, like, psychologically, how did you approach that session? Because it was, well, looking back on it now, we know it was a game changer in terms of your career, but
Yeah.
like, how did you approach that? Obviously there would have been nervousness around how you went to.
None, zero. I've never had an ounce of it. I've never had an ounce of self-doubt. Not one speck. I sat in a room with, rest his soul, Kobe Bryant. I sat in a room with LeBron James. I sat in the room with, like, everybody, right? I've sat across a room with Jay-Z and had arguments. Like, I don't have an ounce of sort of reluctance to sort of believe in what I believe in. There's lots and lots of things I don't know, right? But I also know that part of my intuition is that I have a really good sense of asymmetry and symmetry. That's what comes to me very naturally, right? And when I look at a situation and I sense a bit of asymmetry, my natural inclination is try to create symmetry, right? That's a fundamental of everything that I do. So when I see Elton Brand, yeah, you know what? I don't know at that moment the 99,000 different ways to defend the pick and roll. No, I don't. But I do know that there's something much, much more complex and much deeper than how to run an offense or a defensive play. There's lots of things that hold an athlete back. And it's not always just something something so obvious as like the offensive system.
Yes.
Right. And that's why in many ways I consider myself a problem solver, because I go through a checklist of 450 different potential things to figure out why something isn't working. I'm not a Band-Aid. I like to call myself really like a fixer.
Okay. And like you, all right, in my opinion, the problem with formal education is
Yes.
you get taught what that institution wants you to know. So
Absolutely.
So what
Yes.
you do is you get a group of graduates, 60 or 80 graduates, who go into the same field, they see the
Sure.
same problem, and they have the same solution to the same problem.
100%. Yes, 100%. And because I wasn't privy to that world, I had to create my own. I had to create my own answers. I had to create my own perspective of what the problem was. I had to define it in my terms. Then I had to come up with my own methodology to address that. And then I had to find my own metrics to know how to measure that performance. So I don't think I have 4 degrees. I have a degree in finance. I have a degree in marketing. I have a law degree, and I have a master's in science and kinesiology. I have 4 degrees. So there's a level of education I think that is paramount in order to become a practitioner of what's the word I'm looking for? A responsible practitioner, right? But I also don't think that those things are the answers in terms of how you sort of develop performance. Because if I see another T-test, if I see another tap test, I mean, these just if I see another 40-yard dash test, I'm thinking, all you're doing is just kind of relying on these tests because there's lots of data behind it.
Yeah.
Those to me are not, I don't consider those tests. To me, they're archaic and they're old and they're conservative and they're cautious. Right. But if you go to those classes, that's all you learn. Right. And it's, oh yeah, I'm going to do, it's the same thing over and over and over. And I get it because you have millions and millions of pieces of data and studies. And like, I understand it, but just because something has a scientific study behind it doesn't mean it's gold.
Yeah.
There's lots of things that I do that have no study behind it, but I know they're rooted in a lot of science and a lot of thought and a lot of analysis.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I can't point to a PubMed article to it because no one's thought about it that way. But that doesn't mean I'm a negligent provider because I know what I'm doing.
Yeah.
Right.
And like, because you're a free thinker, you have definitely brought an element of disruptive thinking to solving problems.
100%.
Have you experienced much resistance from like other NBA coaches?
Sure, of course. Yes, because I haven't worn the jersey, that's common in that world, right? And the idea is that in many of it, I'm not speaking for everyone, but in my experience, it's like, wearing that jersey doesn't give you a monopoly on wisdom. Right. And I think what ends up happening is that it's the same stuff regurgitated over and over and over and over and over. And like, I just feel that like I said, I don't know everything, but I objectively know that I've never made a mistake in this space. Okay. And every athlete I've worked with, I have reinvented that athlete. I've taken, college kids and turned them into rookies of the year. I've taken, in some ways it's easy to work with the great famous players, right? But the goal is to reinvent them. The goal is to make them do something they've never done before. I've also taken a lot of pride in, there's a player that was the worst free throw shooter in NBA history, right? And in 6 weeks, he lost 35 pounds and his field goal shooting percentage improved by almost 60%. It's the greatest percentage jump in any statistical category in NBA history. And we never once shot a free throw, right? So I'm just saying that there's so many different ways of doing things. And like, I take pride in being unconventional. Like, I spoke, last week to these amazing folks out in Australia. And I was telling them, I have no problem trying to put honey on my hamburger. Right. And it might sound weird to lots of people, but I'm going there.
Yeah.
Right. I don't think it always got to be like ketchup and mustard.
And do you think a lot of that is not being answerable to a general manager or not being answerable to an agent allows you that creativity?
Absolutely. And I closed the gym down because I don't want anyone in there. I'm not concerned with anyone's opinion. None. None. I don't look for feedback even from the athlete. Like I trust my own instinct, and I trust my own judgment, and I'm a rational thinker, and I'm a very thoughtful thinker, and I have my own like performance metrics in my brain, and I just go through many, many different scenarios to figure out what works. And I don't look over my shoulder, and I'm not interested in what the GM says or the head coach says, because like I know that they look at me like I'm selling magic beans, and I point to really, like I have 100 professional athletes under my belt, but it's okay because I'm not there for them. I'm there for the athlete. That's what the athletes trusted me, and my concern is doing the.
You with me?
Yep. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we just lost it there for a second.
Okay.
And have you ever been tempted to work directly for a franchise?
Yeah, like I've explored it and I've tried it a little bit. And look, I'm not against it. I just want it to be a place that's a very thoughtful place, right? That people are very willing to kind of think through things and try things a little bit differently, right? I don't think, like I've always said, like routine is the enemy.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I once heard you speak about, like the minimal effective dosage, and we live in a society where, everything is overconsumption. If you want to watch,
Sure,
a program tomorrow, you watch Netflix and you can just watch a whole series within the
sure,
space of a day.
sure.
And the strength and conditioning community / industry, whatever way you want to look at it, is kind of, based upon the same principles as well. And I've heard you speak about Usain Bolt, the 14 stride versus the 17 stride,
Yeah,
and there's an
yeah,
analogy to that. Could you explain that to the listeners?
yeah. I think it's like, to me, it's like it's one of, I guess, my doctrines is the idea of efficiency and sort of like what does practice mean? So I don't think that like you watch Usain Bolt, and there's something extraordinary about like how he's able to cover all that space in so few strides, right? And without breaking a sweat. And to me, like sort of metaphorically, like that's what so much of this training should be. It's like, I'm dealing with an athlete that has like a terrible attention span. I have terrible ADD. I was a crappy lawyer. I can't sit still for 4 hours and read case law, right? And so I understand the same thing for the athlete. So when I build a program for an athlete, I'm thinking, is it fun? Is it creative? Is it challenging? Is it thoughtful? Is it effective? Is it functional? Does it translate to performance? All those things have to come into it. And if the answers are no, then I picked the wrong thing, right? And remember too, all this has to be effective within the course of 30 minutes. I don't get 6 hours of their attention.
Yeah.
Right. And I have to be so impactful that they hear my voice over the 55 other million people in their ear.
Okay. And do you get most of your pro basketball players in the off season? Is that your period?
No, both. It's during the season and the off seasons as well. Right. But I literally, over the last few years, I've been so fascinated with other sports too. Like I find soccer players, I find football, it's called soccer or football. I find football so extraordinarily interesting. I find rugby so extraordinarily interesting, right? Like I find like cricket interesting. I feel like there's just so many elements like there that I guess when I grew up the way I did, like I'm a city kid, like you don't see it.
Yeah.
But then those like, spending a few days with Bayern Munich, it's sort of a different sort of approach to like the sport, and a sort of a different appreciation and different love for it. I remember like the very famous guy on Bayern Munich, the Polish guy, and like he had mentioned something about playing for the national team versus playing for like playing in the World Cup versus playing, for your team, and just the pride in which the idea that you can play for your national team. It's extraordinary. Like, like winning like La Liga, right, is nothing compared to playing for Spain and winning a gold medal, right? And it's really neat, kind of like how much certain places love sport versus sometimes in the United States money drives it versus passion driving it.
Yeah, it's that would actually make a nice segue into Gaelic Games. Like over here, Gaelic Games is a completely amateur sport,
Yeah,
very tribal. People
sure.
play, people play for nothing but the love of the sport, which is,
And that's, yes. And oftentimes so much of that is missing, right? Like
absolutely.
people do things for the wrong reasons. It's like, God, I don't know, maybe I'm a purist, but if your answer is I do it because I love it, then every other answer to me is a very far second.
Yes, yes.
Right. And I think when I ask, like, when people like, what kind of people do I work with? People that answer it the way I hope they answer it.
Yeah, and players can see that too. Players can sense when coaches are using them as a stepladder in their progress too.
Sure, absolutely. And in some ways, like, I don't, I don't blame the coach. Right? Everyone's entitled to their own personal goals, right? I don't blame that. But there is something about like the sincerity in the work, right?
Mm.
There is something about, I've never raised my voice at an athlete in my entire life. I guess probably that's why the sort of the hoops whisper idea came into play.
Mm.
Never yelled. Can I be stern? Sure. Can I be sarcastic? Sure. But in terms of raising my voice, never. I've never hard coached. I never mother effered anybody, right? I've never, nothing, and I found that, I don't know, people run through walls for me.
Mm. And you work with a lot of individuals. Do you think that that would change in the team environment if you had to manage multiple characters?
Yeah, it potentially, but it's also in terms of like what premises and what like what ground rules are you creating? Like I don't think I don't know. I feel if man, it's like kids shouldn't be parenting their parents. Parents should be parenting their kids, right? Doctors should be taking care of their patients, not patients taking care of the doctors. Like lawyers, do their best for their clients, not clients servicing the lawyers.
Mm.
And I just think sometimes in professional sports, it's very important to understand that. Like people have a certain expertise for a reason, and people are asking you to do something for a reason, not to punish you, not to hurt you. Parents say, make sure you go to bed early, not because they're trying to like punish you, but they understand that discipline is important. And oftentimes in professional sports, it's lost because people are afraid to offend the athlete. I'm thinking, I'm asking you to do something because I'm here to help you,
Yeah.
not to help me, right? So I ask you to do something. Not, yes, I know it's weird, but it's for a reason. It's like I'm asking you, to drink your milk and and take your vitamins, not because I'm trying to punish you. And that dialogue is missing because I think it's not giving the player too much power, but it's like the players lost perspective, like of why are they asking them to do something?
Mm. And in terms of putting a value on your work and that advice that your mother gave you all
Yeah.
those years ago, do you still hold true with that same system of?
Oh, for a very long time, yes. And in sort of a strange way too, every time I get $1 or whatever from my work, I'm always grateful because I never expected it to ever happen.
Yeah.
Like every time I ever get paid, I never take that for granted. I know it's a very strange thing for like never, ever, 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 because I know what it was like to have a miserable job. I know what it's like to be unemployed. I know what it's like to be poor. I know what it's like to all those things. So anytime I even get 50 cents, like I go, man, wow. It's always, I'm always a little surprised. There's still that 5% in me that is always just grateful and surprised that I've been able to find something I can pay my rent with that
Yeah.
I truly love.
Yeah. And can we go back to the Bayern Munich thing for a second? So how
Sure.
did you actually transition into Bayern Munich? Were
No,
you?
it was just I got a call and like they wanted to sort of experience sort of a cross training sort of experience, and it was great, man. It was great. Like I think part of it was fascinating is that I had done a lot of stuff in China, so I've been around kids that didn't necessarily speak English, but to be in a room and they didn't speak any, a lot of the guys spoke no English, and you have to figure out how to communicate because I don't want to use a translator. I feel that's a cheat.
Hmm.
Right? If I'm good at what I do, then I should be able to communicate it regardless.
Yeah.
They should be able to understand my body language. They should be able to understand the cadence in my words. They should be able to understand the feeling behind my messages. Like if you listen to great opera or great music, you don't need to know the lyrics, man. You don't need to speak the language. It just, you feel it, right? And to me, if I walk into a room with 50 guys from Berlin, shit, if I don't make them feel what I feel, I failed, regardless if I speak German or not.
Yeah, really cool. And in terms of just the systems, in terms of what you brought to the table there, were you in as a skills coach? Were you in
No,
as?
it was more like I guess it wasn't like a strength and conditioning sort of formula, right? It was just more like kind of a conditioning days and agility days. And it was just like, in some ways giving them a like kind of a view of what's it like to play in the NBA. Cause obviously they're the highest level in their world. Right. And it was interesting because like, I was kind of surprised because they're small, right? Because the world I live in is like Amazons, right? Everyone's humongous, right? Long and long and long and long. and they were very regular sized guys. And I think I was just fascinated by looking at each one of them going, man, it's like oftentimes in professional basketball, it's there's a genetic gift that just allows people to become very special, right? But when I looked at these soccer players, like you couldn't say they had a genetic gift because they were 5'8" and they had the same length limbs and the same length arms and the same length feet. It was more like you realized that this was a dream that started at 2 years old, and they were so unbelievably devoted and found a way to get there. It's like they didn't have the luxury of genetics to be able to push them to the top.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean some people are not genetically faster or quicker, obviously, right? But from sort of a anthropomorphic kind of explanation, like it wasn't. There's no guy out there that was 6'7" that had a 50-inch vertical leap just because, like you see in the NBA world. It was like all these soccer players were there because they had picked up this sport at a very, very early age and were incredibly devoted to it. And it was fascinating because I was literally in a room of self-made people.
Yeah. Yeah.
At the highest of the highest of the highest levels.
Yeah, and just in terms of, there's a big, obviously, when we look at what basketball could teach other sports, straight
Right.
away you think footwork,
Right.
you think breaking down defenses, creating space,
Sure.
and then when you look at Gaelic football, which I think you're familiar with, could you draw
Yeah.
some commonalities between the two?
I think that people who are involved in Gaelic football, it's a very, very tough-minded person. I don't know if that's like it's I imagine, because I don't know many people who do it, right? Just what I've seen, I imagine there's a certain personality it attracts, right? Like I can't imagine if you said to someone, training's at 4 a.m, no one's going to complain, right? It's a very hard-nosed, serious, blue-collar, tough it out. Not the focus is on athletically gifted. The focus is on like kind of a bunch of overachievers. And that's what I find very intriguing about some of those sports. Like you don't say, "Oh my God, that guy's 6'5" and he weighs 350 pounds and he runs a 4.5 40." You don't have those kind of conversations, right? Because in your world, it's very hardworking, blue collar, overachieving people that do this because they love it. And because of it, I think you're around a very pure community of like players.
Yeah.
They're not competing for the next Gatorade deal. They're not competing for the next Sprite deal. They're not competing for a $200 million Nike deal, right? They do it because they want to be there in the rain, in the snow, with a bad ankle. The tolerance for pain, I'm sure, is 50x what it is in my world, right? Like there's a badge of honor to play through things. There's a toughness. I think they play for many, many other reasons than money. And that's what makes it almost like you live in a cool ass world.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And you've been exposed to so many overachievers. Like,
Yeah.
what is it that differentiates the overachiever from the overachiever?
The overachiever from the overachiever.
The ultra overachiever.
A curiosity, um, a level of gratitude, and people who truly enjoy struggle, who truly enjoy work, who truly enjoy effort. It's like, you look at the billionaire guys like Buffett and Bill Gates and all those people, like, Warren Buffett, to me, I don't think he loves money because he has all of it. I think Warren Buffett loves making money. He loves the process of the thinking and the building and the doing. And it's like, and I think like, does Mark Cuban still get up at, Mark Cuban owns the Dallas Mavericks. He's a billionaire. Do you think he still gets up at 6 a.m. in the morning to work? Sure. Because I think he loves the idea of work. And to me, what's always like, to me, the very successful overachievers is that they truly love working. They truly love keeping busy. They truly love just becoming better. And the ones that I worry about are the ones that kind of are really quick to kind of, look at themselves and say, I did it. But you'll never look at an overachiever and they'll never tell you I did it. They'll always kind of tell you I'm still doing it.
Yeah, yeah. And
right? There's no finish line.
Yeah, it's the journey.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And The Last Dance is popular at the moment, and it's going on through Netflix. And what the first things that I observed was, now I know we're going back a couple of years ago, but the
Sure.
social side of basketball, and we see MJ with his cigars, and
Sure.
the guys, they seem to enjoy a couple of beers after games. Is that a kind of a common trend in that world,
Yeah,
or?
I mean, look, I think it's irresponsible? Sure. Because there's not one medical study you can read that tells you that drinking wine improves performance. Doesn't. 100%. There's nothing, there's no exercise physiologist, there's no cardiologist, there's no anyone that has an ounce of education and expertise in the space that's going to tell you it does. Could it affect mortality? Sure. Can it maybe cut an edge of anxiety? Sure. But if you're going to tell me, does it improve athletic performance? The answer is fundamentally no, right? But it's become something that players do, and cigarette smoking is the same thing. It's players do. And I think I don't condone it. I don't hate them for doing it. There's many reasons people do lots of things. I just think from a purely like athletic point of view, I think it's a poor choice, right? And if you want to tell me that you want to improve mortality, then go run a mile, right? Go eat an apple, go to bed early, go fishing, find forms of meditating, right? But it's it's a habit that a lot of athletes have picked up, and I don't necessarily approve of it, right? I don't hold them in judgment. My only responsibility to them is to figure out ways of how do we maximize your ability and maximize performance, and that variable to me holds you back.
Yeah.
So when I watch the Michael Jordan stuff, I think Michael Jordan is 1 in a trillion. 1 in a trillion. He's the only guy that could play 36 holes of golf and still get up at 6 o'clock in the morning the next day and still go score 60 points and still have a steak and still have a glass of red wine and still have a cigar. He's 1 in a trillion. So if people are looking to that as a form of like to model their behavior, my response is there's lots of things you can model, but you can't live like him and have his success. It's like the kid that never studies and always gets 100
Hmm.
in school. You can't model your behavior past him because that's the last person you want to model your behavior after. Model your behavior after the overachiever. Model your behavior after a guy who played in the NBA for 15 years who had nothing except effort.
Yeah.
That's the takeaway I have from this. Michael Jordan is the best of the best of the best, but you'll never be able to do what he did living the way he did. Just can't. He's 1 in a trillion.
Yeah. I think modeling yourself off an outlier isn't the most
Yeah, it's not possible. It's not reasonable. It's not you can't achieve that.
yeah. Um, like, so your journey to get where you've gotten today has been just phenomenally inspirational, and I think there's so many coaches that could take so much from it. And to me, like, the biggest take home when I read your book and when I've listened to you speak is, when you do what you love, and when you do what you love with passion and purpose, that you'll never work. And for many people, the hardest person to be when they grow up is to be themselves. And
Absolutely.
I
Yes.
think every now and then, in every industry, in every sport, there becomes someone who just does something completely their own way, and they become their own standard. And when it comes to coaching, I firmly believe that you're one of those people, and I don't say that lightly. You're not
All right.
waiting, you're not waiting for the research to catch up with you. You do it your own way, you create your own methods, and
Yeah.
it's hugely inspirational.
No, I appreciate that. I think look, it doesn't mean that coaching clinics aren't smart. It doesn't mean that teams are doing it the wrong way. All I'm saying is that I didn't have any of these resources. I had nothing, zero. I wasn't given access to that room. I wasn't given access to a mentor. I wasn't even given access to an internship, zero. I had to make all this up on my own. I had to create every ounce of philosophy, every ounce of drill, every ounce of methodology, every interaction, every relationship I had to fabricate on my own. So all I'm saying is that oftentimes that I see just so many things are regurgitated. I don't want to see another quote from someone else quoted on their Instagram page. Quote yourself, figure it out yourself, do it yourself. You know, it's the only way that you can kind of really create your own gospel, if that's your goal, right? And for me, I love doing this, and I wasn't going to get something. No one's opening the door and say, Edan, we want to hire you. They wouldn't even speak to me, right? So I was like, I'm not going to hold that back. I'm going to learn how to make my own music,
Yeah.
right? And eventually, a couple people start listening to it, and a few more people start listening to it, and now all of a sudden, I have a little bit of an audience, right? But I'm not making music to make I don't make music to kind of keep the institution of sports entertained. I make music because I enjoy it.
Yeah. And in terms of, and I know if I'm afraid to use this word, because just in terms of scaling up or sharing your knowledge, or maybe people becoming an intern under you, because
Sure.
I think we can all learn from people. Is that something
Sure.
you've ever considered?
Well, I try to do it in my writing, right? So I just released another book. It's a children's book, right? And the book is called It Takes Patience. And sometimes, like, what I don't want is, I don't want people to look at me as a blueprint, because then I would do them a disservice. I don't want people to look at me and go, oh, there's a drill. I want to learn a drill, right? Like, because it's not about a drill. It's a way of thinking. And that's why through my writing, I've tried to sort of introduce people to, I call it my Edonics, right? It's like my ways of thinking about the world and seeing the world, because it's like, you don't get anything out of it if I'm just showing you 45 minutes of exercises and drills, because then you're not a problem solver, you're a copier,
Mhm.
right? The point is, I'm trying to change the way people think, and the way you think is that you read my stuff. Like, I remember when I was a lawyer, right? When you're a lawyer and you read, I don't know if you have case law in Ireland, does it work the same way? Like, so when you read case law, it's not like the law is in front of your face. You got to read through all the fact and all the decision and everything, and then you got to pick out the law itself. But the law only works based on the facts. So when I see all these drills, I'm thinking that's laziness, because that drill would not work for that athlete, and that drill does not work for that athlete, and that drill doesn't work for that athlete. That drill should be working for one particular athlete for one particular situation.
Yes.
So for me, that like that's why I'm more interested in creating a movement of thinking and a movement of rationale and a movement of analysis, versus creating a situation of just lots and lots of drills, because I don't know if I'd be doing people a disservice with that.
And I think that's where formal education is really lacking, because what happens is we don't look at the athlete, we don't look at the sport, we don't
No,
look at the patterns, the positions, and the forces,
look at a
and
drill.
work, yeah, and work back to an exercise. What
Yes,
we
yes,
do is we learn an exercise, and then we
yes.
just apply that to an athlete.
And that happens all the time, right? And that's where, for me, I just think it's much more complicated than people realize. And often, like, I have a saying, I go, a push-up isn't a push-up isn't a push-up. So what I use a push-up has a very, very different use than where 99.99% of the world uses a push-up, right? And the point is that, like, things need to be customized and things need to be particular,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that's oftentimes what's missing in a lot of these spaces, because people will just see a push-up and they go, oh, Edan does a push-up. I'm thinking, no, no. Because if you actually sat down and understood the 45 minutes of why we're doing that, you understand that's the completely wrong reason why we do a push-up,
Mm-hmm.
right? And it goes back to the idea of, it's not about the drill, man. It's about the bigger picture. It's about the thinking. It's about the analysis. It's about the methodology. And I hate to quote law because I hated it, but I remember when I was in law school, I had a contract law professor, right? And there's like one of the few things I remember out of law school. And he said, you can't take the law and run it for a touchdown 100 yards. You take a law and you run it for 10 yards for a first down, because it all depends on the circumstance. And it's the same way I look at performance, same way I look at training. It all depends, right? And only sophisticated practitioners, right, understand the word depends.
Yeah, yeah, and that's absolute gold in that there, Idan. Absolute gold. I absolutely love your work. I
I
think
appreciate it.
yeah, I really do. Could you just give the listeners just an indication of where they can find you if you haven't read any of Idan's writings? Um, I would really recommend that straight away. You get into the Hoop Whisperer anyway. It's a phenomenal book. It's as I said, it goes way beyond basketball. There's so much you can take in terms of lessons for life, and every book is a coaching book, but this one is a phenomenally good coaching book. But could you direct us towards your website?
Sure. So on Instagram, my handle is Edan Wan. It's spelled IDANWAN. I think my website is edanravin.com. I've written 2 books. One was a bestseller. The other one I just released. So the Hoops Whisperer, when people ask me what it's about, I tell them, it's about the importance of relying on faith in sort of a non-religious context and intuition when trying to find your purpose in life. That book is available. It's sold out, like, in bookstores, but it's always available on Amazon and on iBooks. And my children's book I just released, it's called It Takes Patience. is a story that kind of echoes sort of more of my adult conversations that I had in Hoops Whisperer, but it was a story that's been in my head for a couple of years, and I just released that, and that's available on Amazon as well. Yeah, and I'm like, look, I'm always happy to chat with people. I'm grateful for you guys having me, listening through my, you know, I have a lot of opinions. I can talk for hours, but it's something that I enjoy, and kind of hoping I can sort of shake people out of this, I know, kind of seeing the world all the same way, because that gets pretty damn boring, you know.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Edan, thank you very much for being
Oh,
on the
my
show.
pleasure. Thank you for having me, man.
You're more than welcome, buddy.
Okay.